Hello everyone, it's Silvia from Fiddler Tarot. Welcome to my channel. Today we're going to have a look at a few unicorn decks that entered my collection recently. So unicorn decks are, for me, and generally speaking, I see that my idea of a unicorn deck is very similar to anyone else's in the tarot community. But it's a deck that it's out of print, it's very hard to find, and it's also one of those decks that stays in your list, in your wish list for a while, and you keep an eye out for it, and you look at eBay listings, and you always find them with prices that are way out of your comfort zone, and you look for them in a Facebook groups just to see if someone is ready to rehome those decks. And I have to be honest, that list, at least in my case, is very long. But sometimes, and usually happens at least once a month, that at least I've been given the possibility to acquire one of these decks. Sometimes I'm really lucky because I can get them at a very, very affordable price. Other times I really have to think twice about purchasing them because they're quite expensive. But in any case, I always show these decks to my members and we talk about these decks every time that I do receive one. But I thought it would be fun to just do a tarot and oracle decks haul that only focuses on unicorn decks and that I have acquired in the last 2 or 3 months. So the first one I'm going to show you is this one. Now, this deck is very, very unique. It's a deck that has been on my list for probably 2 to 3 years. I really wanted to acquire this deck. I was almost happy to spend quite a bit of money on it, but I never really I never really found the courage to actually click the buy button. I've seen it listed for $250 US. That was way out of my league. But in other cases, it was around 200 Australian dollars, which is more affordable. But I just never really found the courage to go ahead. What happened was that in some cases, when it comes to unicorn decks, especially decks that were very, very popular, and in many cases also indie decks, that went out of stock and then out of print. If you're patient enough, you will see that sometimes they actually do get a reprint. And this is happening more and more often, I have to say, in the last 2 to 3 years. I know for a fact that Betalin Bajema, for example, she's the creator of the Madame Lydia Wilhelmina Tarot of the Autumn Scenes and the Macabre and something like that. I'm so sorry. I always butcher the title because it's way too long, but it's a fantastic deck. She actually makes them available every now and then in her website. And so if you're patient enough, you don't have to spend $500-600 on the Madame Lydia Tarot because it will come back available at a very reasonable price. This is what happened for this deck. So this deck is the Major Arcana deck based on the tarot cards painted by Leonora Carrington. Leonora Carrington is a surrealist artist, or was. Unfortunately, she passed away. And her books are amazing. You can see published by Folger Press in the UK. You can see her artwork contained in these books, which is really, really interesting. She was originally from Mexico, and she did some really intense work on tarot. It's part of the movement she represented. So Leonora Carrington was not the only one interested in tarot back then, like in let's say the 1920s. But it was a whole movement of surrealist painters that were really interested in the occult, and obviously their production reflected that. This deck was, as I said, on my list for a while. I was almost convincing myself to spend a lot of money on it because I really wanted it. And then all of a sudden there were rumors about Folger Press starting a reprint of this deck. And so, I just, I held my guns and I didn't pull the trigger on this one because I kind of hoped that that was actually what was going to happen. And finally they did at the end of last year. It took a couple of months or 3 months to be printed and then shipped over from the UK. This is a very interesting deck, and I have to say they come anointed, so they use a perfume to anoint the box, at least the outside of the box. So what will happen is that with time, this perfume will just seep through the box, and the cards after a few months will have that kind of very, very faint scent to them. Obviously, if that is not your thing, you need to know this before you purchase this deck. I'm actually not sure that it's still available. It was still available until a couple of months ago on the Folger Press website, but it might actually be sold out. But just to show you, these cards are really fantastic. I really appreciate this deck. This is, for me, definitely a collector's item. I have not been reading with this deck. I don't think I ever will. And the simple reason is that, well, first of all, it's a major arcanas only. So generally speaking, I actually do prefer to have all of my 78 cards, because I like to read not just about the energies at the as above, but also as the so below, which is depicted in the minors. But it's also because I am genuinely scared about ruining this deck. I have never even shuffled it. I just literally do like this when I shuffle it, and that's as far as I get to, to shuffle it. And it corresponds to the fact that I'm so very worried that this will go out of print again, and it will become really expensive to acquire it. And I definitely don't want to spend that much money on it, just in case I ruin this one. So this will not happen. I pledge not to ruin this deck. It is an incredibly beautiful deck, but what's really interesting is that, as I said before, this is not curated art. This is actually Leonora's envisioning the tarot, the major arcanas of the tarot, and painting the cards. So obviously you can see that because the symbology is very, very much reminiscent of the RWS system. In many cases, in others, it probably is not as close. But this is an incredible deck. It really is a testament to how tarot has been influencing pretty much any kind of art, from books to paintings to films to fiction to obviously the production of decks throughout the years, the decades. And this, as I said, comes from the beginning of the 20th century. So obviously we're looking at something that it's, at least in its concept, is 100 years old. Now, obviously, it was not, I think that at the beginning it was just a book. And I think that the book is still available, and it's a very beautiful coffee table book. Might be on the expensive side. But then again, if you were ready to pay $250 for this deck, you will be happy to see that it has been reprinted. As I said, again, at the time of filming, I am not entirely sure that this is available again. But it's also true that these publishing companies, when they do one run, they're kind of happy to do a second run if there's enough request. So this is a unicorn deck that I was lucky enough to actually acquire, not spending a huge amount of money. And I have to say again, if you were wondering whether your favorite unicorn deck is ever going to be reprinted and you don't want to spend that much money on it, I do recommend, if you can do it, just be patient, because sometimes it just so happens that you will see them coming back. Now, the second deck that I want to talk about is this one, and it's the Lonely Dreamer Tarot. This is a deck, this is the second edition. It's a deck that has been created by M. Wotherspoon, although I have to say that this is indeed curated art and is based on the work by Odilon Redon, who was a French painter. Now, this is again the second edition, and I've shown this deck before. And one of my members actually suggested a pairing because I was actually asking for recommendation for a pairing for this deck, an Oracle deck that goes well with this one. And I was so intrigued because I said one of my members suggested pairing it with the Deborah Cough-Chapin soul cards. So if you're not familiar with this work, I'm just going to show you a few of them. I do have both of the decks. I think that they are still in print, although please don't quote me on this, I'm not entirely sure. But so I do have two decks. However, many of these cards, 78 to be precise, I've actually repurposed them as a tarot deck because I do believe that many of the cards that belong to the Soul Cards 1 and Soul Cards 2 can actually be seen as cards representing tarot cards. And so it was a fantastic exercise. I think I did a video on that, or possibly on Instagram, I don't remember, because it was before my YouTube time. And it was a time in which everyone was doing this. And I have to say, watching the videos of people repurposing the soul cards into a tarot deck was actually kind of amazing, because it is a very intuitive kind of deck or decks. And we all have a different take on that. And it was really fun to see what the others were thinking. But so this member of mine, she recommended pairing this deck, so the tarot, the Lonely Dreamer tarot, with the soul cards. I have not tried that, but I thought it was a great idea. And so I'm actually going to try it right now. So these two decks, obviously very artistic, very intuitive kind of decks. I have to say that the Lonely Dreamer tarot, as I was saying, it is curated art, but what happens is that the creator, Waterspoon, decided to add, let's say, with digital manipulation, the elements referring back to the minor arcana. So, for example, in here, this will be the curated art, this will be the original painting, and then the creator of the deck inserted these wands, sticks or wands, and the cups in here. And that was in order for us, the readers, to be able to to relate to the cards and see that this is indeed the energy of the Eight of Wands, or this is the Three of Cups. I have to say that this is a really well let's say it's a very successful kind of experiment. The results are very, very good. It doesn't really stand out too much. So the inserts of the cups, the swords, and the coins, etc., doesn't really jump out of the cards, but you do tend to notice them enough to be able to recognize the cards. I believe in some of the cards there were already some symbology. Certainly not in this one, for example. What happens is that in many cases, you will see that someone has actually done the same. So they've taken some curated art and they have inserted some, with digital manipulation, they've inserted the symbols. And it didn't necessarily work, or at least it did not work for me. But I have to say, in this case, I am quite stoked by the results. But let's just see, because I feel like we have so much work on the intuition when you use these two decks together. I feel like the artwork is very similar. It is not the same. If you're not familiar with the artwork represented by the soul cards, this is what it's called touch painting. And it's a painted technique that is basically... So I've seen it because I watched videos of how Deborah, and she has a course that runs through the year, and there's a lot of groups that can actually attend this course, which is, let's say, combining meditation with the artistic expression of your own manifestations and your feelings through art. And so basically, you will use two canvas, one where you put the blob, literally just blob of ink. And then you put a canvas on top, and literally with your fingers, you will just trace the canvas on top in such a way that then underneath on the original canvas, the ink that you poured on it will necessarily follow the tracing of your fingers. Obviously, this is a very let's say it's not something that you will nail immediately, because I've actually tried and do so myself and with fountain pen inks. And even though I created some pretty interesting, let's say, splatter kind of creations, it's by no means as complete and as expressive as these paintings here. So as a matter of fact, I do believe that there might be some additional kind of media using these paintings. I'm not entirely sure. If you have this deck, let me know what you think about it, because I really feel like it's one of those decks that really hits you in the feelings. And so because the Lonely Dreamer, and it's also because of the name, that the Lonely Dreamer, it really does seem to point to that kind of realm, you know, the realm of not just the dreams, but also the very, very personal kind of feelings that you may experience. And let's not forget that the painter himself, Odilon Redon, well, let's say that everyone says that he was a troubled child, etc. But then again, I really wonder what that means nowadays. Nowadays, what we would have called a troubled child 100 years ago is just someone who needs help, or they need to be understood, and they need someone who relates to them. So what's a troubled child? Nowadays, there's no troubled child. There's someone that can have, you know, some kind of mental discomfort, and they just need help. So I really wonder what was described as a troubled child. It would be very interesting to read a biography. If you know anything about this painter, please let me know in the comments below, because I would be very interested. I realized that I'm just flipping the cards and I haven't read any of these yet, but that's simply because I think that this kind of exercise needs to be done probably in private, in the sense that the soul cards for me are always very emotional. I have to say, I used to pair them a lot with the Shimmering Veil Tarot by Cilla Conway, but that combo made me overly emotional, and there is such a thing as too many emotions sometimes, or at least for me. And so I was seeing that even though I was attracted to that kind of pairing, I had to be very careful in not overdoing it, because it really, every time I was using those two decks together, it made me so overly emotional that I was kind of paralyzed in my emotions. It was not an actual outlet of emotions. It was more like a triggering kind of thing, and it was kind of paralyzing for me. So I ended up not using that combo anymore. But I don't think this is the case for these two. I think that there's a lot that can be done working with these two together. But in any case, so this is the Lonely Dreamer Tarot. Is definitely another tarot deck that it was on my list for a long time, and I finally acquired it. I'm so very happy that I got a hold of this unicorn deck. If you're not familiar with it, right now, right now I don't think it's available anymore either. But last year there was a third and final Kickstarter of the printing, and I was not quick enough to get to back the Kickstarter campaign. I kicked myself for it because I really wanted this deck, and then I was really lucky to get a copy of the second edition, which also came with a few additional cards. I wouldn't say that they're oracle cards, even though they may function as oracle cards, but there's just not many of them. There's just 6. But it is very interesting to see the keywords associated with these. And I have to say that I did back the Kickstarter campaign of the Lenoir by Odilon Redon, which is an oracle deck. And so I'm really, really excited to receive that deck and see if it pairs up well with the tarot. So the next deck was another one of those decks that really sells for crazy prices. And I kid you not, I've actually seen a listing probably last week on one of the Facebook groups, and this person was asking for $500 US. So that is a lot of money. It's about 800 Australian dollars. It's a lot of money for a deck. Originally, it's even more money if you consider that originally this deck actually came out mass market. And I did not get that one, so just in case you were wondering. But what happened was that I think I was filming one morning last week, And one of my members got in touch with me saying that this deck was available for a very reasonable price in one of the Facebook groups. But I was filming, and so I had my phone on silent, didn't hear her calling me, and then somebody else messaged me, and I was like, after I filmed, I looked at my phone and I had something like 5, 6 notifications related to this. And so this person was so sweet because she actually reached out to the seller and she got this deck for me without even knowing if I was going to get it or not. She just thought, you know what, I know you want it, so I'll get it. If you want it, you can get it off me. But let's make sure that we get it for that price because it was very convenient. And so thank you so much. And on top of everything, it came with one of the most beautiful bags I've ever seen for a tarot pouch or bag. And this is made by the Tarot Bag Ladies. And this person that got this deck for me is one of the Tarot Bag Ladies. So it was amazing because she contacted me and she said, and it's also coming with a tarot bag from the Tarot Bag Ladies. Look how beautiful this is. Apart from the fact that it's perfect. You see sometimes there's always a stitch that is out of, the frame. And but this is just, I think it probably have been custom made. I mean, I'm not entirely sure, but it's perfect. It's the right size for this deck in specific. And it's absolutely gorgeous. I mean, look at the butterflies at the back. I just absolutely love everything about it. I love the colors. I love the design. I love the fabric. It's just absolutely gorgeous. And then it opens up like this. And yes, this is the deck. So let's have a look at this deck because you'll probably recognize it. It is the Heart of the Fairies, or is it called the Heart of Fairy? Sorry, it's the Heart of Fairy Oracle. Let me just zoom out because it did come with the book by Brian and Wendy Froud. This was originally published by Abrams, but as I said, it was a mass market publisher. And this book, so there's a lot of people that told me that the book of the other deck, Oracle deck, which is called The Fairies Oracle, just like that, The Fairies Oracle, and it's just by Brian Froud, not by Wendy. That book or that deck is a mass market as well. It's still in print. You can still find it on Amazon. It's not very expensive. And I was told that the book of the Fairies Oracle, so not this one, but the other deck, is a million times more interesting than this book. But I have to say, this is incredible. I just absolutely love it. I just have a very quick look because I received this deck at the beginning of the week. And I didn't have enough time to just look at it properly, but the deck is amazing. So let me just show you the other decks just to make a bit of a comparison. So this is the other Oracle deck that I was talking about. This is by Brian Froud. The text is by Jessica Macbeth. So when we look at this production, the box is always a bit flimsy. So I did get this one new from Amazon, but ironically, the box came this way. So I don't know whether it was and by this, I mean a bit banged up. I don't know if you can see here. I guess it's just the way these boxes are made. And that it's not necessarily the sturdiest thing in the world. So this is the book that everyone says is a lot better than the book that comes with the Heart of Fairy. So the Fairies Oracle. And I have to say, I actually had a bit of a more of a look on this book here, so the Heart of a Fairy, rather than this one. But I am very excited about getting into both of these books. But just to give you an idea, these are the cards of the deck that is still in print, still available, very affordable price. These are the backs. I think that this is the easiest way to recognize them. So I actually ironically prefer the backs of this deck that is not a unicorn deck, rather than this one. But then again, I mean, the backs are the backs, right? It's not something that will constitute a deal breaker for me if I don't like the backs of a deck. Absolutely not. I'm very happy to focus on the front of the cards. This one, So these two have some cards which are quite similar when it comes to this kind of alien vibe fairies, like this one here, for example. There are a few of these ones in the Heart of the Fairy Oracle as well. But then you see there's a lot more to them. The borders are slightly different. There's also, I believe that these first cards do not have a title, but then we do have a number and a title on the cards. I have to say also that the cardstock is different. This one is thicker and feels sturdier rather than this one, which feels very papery. It is very recognizable. I mean, you would know immediately that these cards come from the same author and creator, of course. But I guess, you know, there's a lot of people asking themselves, why should I spend? And I understand the question. Why should I spend, as I said, listed for $500 on a deck like this, when this one costs about $25, $30? What is it that makes this deck so much better than this deck? I don't know if I would definitely, actually I do know, I would definitely not spend $500 on this deck. As I said, the reason why I did get it at the end was because it was a very, very reasonable price. But it was still, I'd say, 5 times the price of this deck. So what is it that makes, wow, these two together amazing? It's the same kind of vibe, same kind of, you know, crunch position. I really like that. First of all, my first impressions of these two, I do prefer this one because of the titles. The font in the titles, to me, is a lot easier to read. It is more accessible. The cardstock, as I said before, I feel that this one is a better quality cardstock. It doesn't mean that this one is a bad quality. It just feels like this one is an improvement on that. However, as I said before, everyone agrees that the book that comes with the non-unicorn deck is a lot better than the book that comes with the unicorn deck. The art style is so very similar that, you know, it feels like we're definitely looking at almost as if it were the same deck. To be honest with you, if this one didn't even have different cardstock, different titles, and different borders than this one, I would definitely think that they're coming from the same deck. Having said that, there's something else. I mean, I have been working with this deck only once because I just didn't really have much time. But it feels like this one is a lot more intuitive, a lot more communicative. And it also gives you the possibility to do a very, very deep kind of work. And I also have to say, this deck is the equivalent of a slap on the face. It is such a direct deck. And there's no way to hide. There's no running away. It will chase you. You try and run away from this deck, it will chase you. I kid you not. It is such an intense, potent, powerful deck that it feels in and by itself like a whole entire experience. And I have to say, to me, so the way in which I read it and the messages that it gave to me, so not necessarily to everyone, but it's also a bit on the shadow side. So I did do some shadow work with this deck. Something that I wouldn't be able to do as directly or as successfully with this deck. So if that is the main reason why this deck is a a sought after deck, also, you know, depending on the fact that obviously it's not in print anymore, it's hard to find. So I do understand that there is a collectible item kind of work in the background that makes it so that this deck is more expensive. But I'm just trying to understand why there is so much hype about this deck, and I think I get it. I am generally, you know me, I'm generally very skeptical because I tend to try and understand what the motivation behind put the prices up that much is, other than, of course, making a profit out of it. But in some cases, it is kind of understood by the tarot community. I don't know if you feel the same. So if you see a unopened, sealed copy of the Bonestone and Earthflesh Tarot by Avalon Cameron, illustrated by Anna Turian for $300-400, you probably think it's an okay price. If you see, for example, the Collective Tarot or the Delta Enduring or the Slow Holler selling for $1,000, you probably think that it's a good price. It doesn't necessarily mean that you will rush and buy it because it is a lot of money, but at the same time, there is a kind of an understanding that those decks are definitely collectible items. And so as such, you probably, you're excusing the sellers. You kind of understanding that it's taken for granted. It's acceptable. What makes it so? That's something that has always been fascinating for me. As a collector, I've had the opportunity to buy some of the most expensive, nowadays expensive decks in the world. I'm talking about the Grand Berlin, for example. And the Grand Berlin, for example, now sells for 1,500 Australian dollars, which is about, I would say, 900 US dollars. And that's an actual selling price. And I thought to myself, when I bought it for 180 euros. That was a long time ago. And it was a gift on top of everything. But I always ask myself, because I do have this deck, and every now and again I have a look at it and I ask myself, would I now buy this deck spending that much money? And I have to be honest with you, I probably would, not for that amount of money. There is no deck, or there is no way that I can afford something like that. But I would probably spend a fair bit of money on that deck if I had the possibility to purchase it, because I do recognize that it's a fantastic, beautiful, but also extremely meaningful deck for me. But when it comes to this deck, I would not have spent 500 US dollars on it, that's for sure. So it really is subjective, isn't it? It feels like it really depends on how much the collector is willing to spend. And that in itself is a little bit of bargaining technique, because obviously if you find someone who really, really wants something and they post an ISO, so in search of, they're obviously willing to spend probably a little bit more than other people on a deck they've been looking for quite some time. So I've seen the Yokai Yochi selling for also 500 US dollars. And that's a crazy amount of money for a deck that has been published in 2020. But then again, it is a unique deck. So there's something here. I would love to hear your opinion on how much have you spent? What's your top? What's your limit when looking at a unicorn deck? How much will you be willing to spend on a unicorn deck that it's out of print and very hard to find? I would be very interested. Obviously, you don't have to share the exact amount. You can tell me, yes, I would spend a lot of money, or no, I wouldn't never spend more than $100 on a deck, for example, which is perfectly, well, it's actually not cheap, because $100 is not a small amount of money. But what I mean to say is that I would be very interested to know what your opinion is on this matter. The next deck is another one of those decks that was originally printed mass market, but it went out of print. And what happened in this particular case was that there was a different publishing company that picked up the rights to publish, or the license to publish this deck. But they, and this is normal consensus, I'm not saying anything, contrarian to the public opinion, they did a terrible job out of that printing. So you'll probably know by now that I'm talking about the Guyan Tarot. So the Guyan Tarot is by Joanna Powell Corbell. And if this name rings any bell, it's because she's also the author of the Herb Propster's Tarot, which is a name that I will never be able to pronounce correctly. So please excuse my way of pronouncing the name of that deck. It is just impossible for me to do so. So the Guyan Tarot, this one is a unicorn deck, has been a unicorn deck for me, and I'm so happy that I finally got it, because I was finally able to get a hold of the previous editor's publication, which is Llewellyn. This is a beautiful, really beautiful deck. However, when it was picked up by, I believe the latest one is Schiffer, they changed the deck and in such a way that no one actually likes it. I have to be honest with you. So the book, I believe that I did some kind of a comparison between the books, and I have to say that the book is 99% very similar. What could be different between the Llewellyn and the Schiffer edition is probably the font, because this one feels chunkier. It feels like it's got more pages, but it also looks like the font is slightly larger than the other publication, and so I do prefer this one in any case. But when it comes to the actual content, we're probably 99% the same. And this is the deck. Now, you will know the quest about this deck. This deck, when it was published by Llewellyn, it was popular, but it wasn't, let's say, a really sought after deck. People liked it, people loved it, people found it meh. It really is personal. But what happened was that the moment in which Schiffer picked it up and published it and applied all of those changes, that was the moment in which this deck became really sought after. Why? Because Schiffer added 2 additional borders, actually only one. We see the white border here, and then they added the blue, really wide border on the around the cards. They ended up being really huge cards, and that blue border was, and this is personal, you may love the blue border. Personally, I love the color blue, but not when it's on a tarot deck as a border. It feels very distracting. It really does, it feels pointless to me, and it makes the cards too big for me to handle them. There were other changes as well, particularly when it comes to the font. The font of the Schiffer publication was not very nice. It was clear, readable, absolutely, but it really was aesthetically unpleasant, at least to me. And the major change was also concerning the cardstock. So the Schiffer publication is very glossy, and so much so that the cards were always sticking one to the other. When we look at the Llewellyn publication, it's actually, even in this case, the border is slightly bigger than what I would like, but I have to say, because the artwork actually goes into, you know, outside of the frame or the artwork itself and into the white borders, is actually really cool. The effects are very, very nice. What I did, I took the Schiffer publication, I chopped off the blue borders, and I also did some measurement, and I took away a bit of the white borders as well, and it does look very similar to this, except that, you know, the font style is different, and the cardstock, as I say, cardstock, I am a cardstock fanatic. It is a deal breaker for me sometimes. It's also because when I don't mind when it's a really good cardstock, like this is not linen, so it's probably not my favorite. However, I have to say that my favorite cardstock of all time is the US Games cardstock from the 80s, that buttery feel to it that you can also have in the Somnia Tarot, which is an indie deck. So that's my favorite of all time. If I don't have that one, then what I require from a cardstock is that I can actually shuffle and fan out a deck. Sometimes it is impossible to do so because of how sticky the cards are, especially when it's very, very glossy. But there's also that a very, let's say the initial 2020, 2021 kind of rose petal cardstock that was very, very sticky. So this is the reason why this deck published by Llewellyn is really sought after, because the cardstock, because it doesn't have the blue borders, even though, as I said, you can chop them off, and because of the font of the titles. This overall, it's an amazing deck. It's really beautiful. It's very powerful as well. It does have So if people on the cards is not your thing, this is not your deck, because there's a lot of people, and the more you get to know this deck, the more you read about it, you will know that in many cases these were friends, relatives, or people in the community around Joanna. So if that is something that you're not okay with, which is totally fine, then you might not enjoy this deck. I personally don't have any problems with, knowing that some of these people, well, all of them are actually existing people, existing persons. I don't have a problem with that. I start having a problem with that when I have strong associations with them. So if I were to produce a deck with people I know that are in my life, that would be very limiting, because when I look at the card, I don't necessarily want to think about the person I'm seeing in the card. If, I don't know, if this was a friend of mine, I wouldn't be able to focus on the meaning of the Seven of Earth. I would forever think about what this person represents for me. But this is not the case, and so obviously I don't know these people. Knowing that they actually exist doesn't bother me in the slightest. But I do know that in some cases it may represent a bit of a deal breaker. I know, for example, that a lot of people criticize Jamie Richardson in her Ember Nora tarot because she depicted her husband, for example, her mom, and she talks about them in the cards. I personally don't mind, but I know that it is a thing. So if, those knowing that who the characters are distracts you, then obviously this is not your thing. Now, this deck was really sought after, still is, the Llewellyn publication. I've seen it selling for $250, $300. I was super lucky because I think I only spent $25 on it. It was someone that, they alerted me to the fact that the box was falling apart and the book was used. But I didn't mind. I really wanted to focus on the cards, and I was very lucky to get a hold of this deck. So this is the Guyan Tarot. And last but not least, I have a deck that I know for sure a lot of people will be very jealous of. I am so sorry, but there are a couple of more editions of this deck you can find. They're still available, still on print. Both of those editions available on Amazon, very reasonable price. It is a mass market deck. However, I have the indie edition of the Bonfire Tarot by Bybee Angus West. Bybee actually lives in New South Wales, 600 kilometers north from where I live. And I know that 600 kilometers sounds like a lot, but in Australia it's nothing. It's literally around the corner, as we say. This deck is amazing. I originally got it because a really good friend of mine into tarot, she alerted me to how beautiful this deck was. And back then, I think it was a few years ago, I was able to get the mass market edition, the one with glossy cardstock. I think that now that edition might still be available, but there's a new edition which is slightly different also when it comes to a few changes in the cards, perhaps the tone of the cards, the exposure in some of them. They look brighter somehow, and definitely the cardstock because it's linen. So that is the latest edition of the Bonfire Tarot. But this one, my friends, is the indie edition. And I know that many of you would be very, very jealous that I got it. I am so sorry. I mean, I'm not sorry that I got it. I'm so sorry that I'm showing you the Bonfire Tarot, the indie edition, because I know that a lot of you would go, I wish I could get it. Unfortunately, this deck is every now and then you can find it on, as I said, the usual, your eBay or your Facebook, but it does sell for like 500 Australian dollars. Did I pay that much for it? Absolutely not. I paid a fraction of that price. I still cannot believe how lucky I was. It was in perfect conditions. This booklet is handmade by Bybee, so it looks like it's a bit damaged, but that's because it was intended to be handmade and photocopied. And there's a whole story about how she explained that she literally ran out of ink while she was photocopying the pages of this, and I am just so very stoked that I have this deck for such an affordable price. It is perfect in many cases. A lot of people said that their copy arrived with a bow. Mine doesn't have a bow. I'm stoked. The cardstock is amazing. It's one of those really beautiful matte cardstock. I believe that when it comes to these kind of colors, you probably need a bit of a gloss in the finish, in the top coat, because it would definitely enhance the saturation of the colors. But what happens is that the first edition, which I also have, because I was about to rehome it when I got this deck in, and I thought to myself, I'm not going to need the mass market edition. However, I kept it because, first of all, because I found an Oracle deck that has really similar vibes to this one, similar color palette, very, very beautiful together, but it also does have a gloss finish, and so it pairs really well with the mass market edition, which is glossy too. If you can see the differences in the card, we're looking at a slightly larger artwork, of course, also slightly wider borders, but not that much, and definitely the difference between the cardstock. As you can see, it is very glossy, it catches the light, not the best when it comes to filming or taking photos. But then again, I kept it because of that Oracle deck, and if you can notice, I really do believe that the colors actually are more saturated, they're more brilliant because of the gloss finish, which, by the way, I don't have the linen edition, which is the latest one of the Bonfire. I have to be honest with you, I am not a fan of that edition. I have actually seen it. I think Sharon from the Trio Witches Star was making a comparison between the two mass market editions. I don't necessarily like the linen edition. I think that even more so than a matte finish, the linen finish takes away some of the brilliance and the saturation of the colors. But on top of that, I do believe that there's been some kind of manipulation on the art itself. And it just feels different. Again, I don't have the latest edition, so I could be completely wrong, but I do hear, the same opinion out of people who actually have all the 3 editions. This deck is incredible. I love how powerful it is. The imagery is simply stunning, amazing. By the way, in case you don't know, so Bybee is launching a Kickstarter campaign for a new tarot deck. If at the time of filming, it was not launched yet, but it could be live now, so check it out. It is, however, a black and white deck, and even though the artwork is absolutely fantastic, I don't know. I haven't convinced myself to back that campaign yet. I might at the end of the day, but one of the things that I love about Bybee is the choice of colors. And so it feels like, even though I also love very much the art style, it is not the same. When I look at a black and white rendition of a tarot deck by her, it is not as appealing to me as these ones have been. And I'm also on the lookout for the Word of Sarah Howard, but not the latest edition, because I just cannot read the font. I know that it's such a petty reason why not to want a deck, but I have to say the keywords for me worked so much better than the sentences in the latest edition of the Word of Sarah Howard, which I did have at a certain time, and then I rehomed it because I could not read with that deck. There were sentences all over the cards. I couldn't read them, couldn't read the font. They were very the banner upon which they were written, they were very light gray, and that just did not work with the colors on the cards. It made it even more difficult for me to read them. And that's such a pity, because I absolutely love that deck, but it broke my heart, but I just rehomed it because I wasn't using it. So I'm still looking for the first edition of the Word of Sarah Howard with the keywords, and that one, my friends, really sell for a lot of money. But then again, I was lucky enough to find this one for a very affordable price, so you never know. Hope never dies. Now, that was it for today. These were my recent unicorn decks that came into my collection. I am so very stoked to have them. Let me know. My unicorn wish list is so long. Like, I would love to have a copy of the Delta Enduring without spending thousands of dollars on it. I would love, for example, the Collective Tarot, the Slow Hauler for sure. I was this close to buying a copy last year, but it was just way too expensive for me. There's a number of decks that are out there, and I know that there's people that are willing to sell them with, without asking for incredible prices. And I am a very patient person and I have a budget, so obviously I cannot splurge. But it's fun to get these decks. And, every now and then you get to understand why, as I was mentioning earlier, they are priced the way that they are. But let me know in the comments below. I would love to know what your unicorn decks are, because I'm always interested and sometimes I get to know you decks I never heard of. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.